I feel I'm online. Good morning, everybody. I'm Roland Hommes. I'm from the Dutch Central Bank, even though I'm also a personal consultant. Some fiscal rulings in the Netherlands prevent me to be employed at the Dutch Central Bank, being a private consultant. So I'm a fixed contract. Next to me, your half-god Geert, who is trying to solve my problem. I'm going to put forward our problem at the central bank that we detected about 3 to 5 years ago. And as an architect, I designed a construction that required help from outside because we didn't have enough expertise. When the angle brackets came in, enter Geert. The central bank is the supervisor in the Netherlands on the whole of the financial sector, which is extraordinary in Europe because most of the countries have different organizations to supervising their financial markets. As you can see, we are supervising anything that does anything in financial transactions, whether it be a bank, an insurance company, or pension funds, or anything like that. On the other hand, we are being forced to report to European institutions like the ECB, the central bank in Frankfurt, or EIOPA for insurance industry in Frankfurt, or even on a global scale to the IMF for the World Bank, etc. They are expecting reports from us too. When I got back about 5 years ago into the central bank, the organization was completely decentralized. So we had the division of statistics were aiming at collecting all the data that is necessary for making reports, broken up into business units that were completely independent. So they had their own IT, they had their own IT solution in exchanging the data. So they were putting forward their own format obligations to the market and their own reports to the central organizations. This was less perfect because we had a couple of thousands of reporters reporting to us in all kinds of formats. It's because these business units were free in what they were asking. So from Excel to X-oriented languages, anything was possible. The channels that we're using, everything was free for these divisions. The new kid on the block came in about 2012 or 13, was mentioning XBRL. The XBRL syntax that was designed for business reporting, maybe some of you have know this language, is specialized for supervisors to collect financial data from commercial ventures. And DNB, as an organization, didn't know XBRL at all. And this is where the IT department saw their chance to get some centralized processing in place instead of having all the divisions doing, or all the departments in the division do it independently. They hired me for creating some kind of a flow or automated XBRL processing, so collecting it, validating it, and reporting it back to the ECB, etc. And about 1.5 years later, that was a satisfactory solution for them. And a half a year later, they were calling me again to say, well, can you clean up all this other mess of reporting syntaxes we have in this organization? One of these, the assignment said that they wanted to have a limited number of syntaxes put upon the market to restrain any administrative burden. You can understand that if you're a bank and there are 6 business units of the DNB asking for reports in all kinds of formats, and maybe even asking the same data twice in different reports because they have a different take on why they want to have these figures, that is pretty cumbersome and expensive. You have to understand that anything the central bank does is a cost to the reporters. There's no added benefit for them. So they want to minimize cost, and the central bank is also interested in downgrading costs for these commercial ventures. We were inventing that we were trying to limit to 2 formats on collecting the data, and unfortunately we are in no position to negotiate any format exchanges with the institutions that are being phrased upon us. So we went with a solution approach that we said, well, okay, we have one thing that is stable, that is the database. We have one thing that is stable, that is the portal, and all the rest is negotiable. With this solution, with this frame of the solution that we had to work in, we went to, in this case, Geert. We said to him, we want to have one central format that comes from the database and put that in all the formats that need to go outside. So we're having two kind of focuses here. On the reporter side, we have only 2 formats coming in, and on the outside going 5 formats going out. And internally, we work with only 1 format based on our database. So I put forward to him, I want to have a separation of concerns. The syntaxes that are being put on the business units cause them to create a kind of panic, because they're really good in explaining what kind of semantics they need to report, but they don't know anything about angle brackets or curly braces or whatever they want. So the IT department does the curly brackets or the other kind of brackets that we needed, and the department worries about the semantics that's being conveyed. And in this transformation, we need to map what is in our database to whatever the institution wants from us. So we create something that is dedicated for the business to transform what is in our database into what our institution wants, and then IT department comes in and transforms it to the syntax and the encryption and anything they need, and being put upon us. And this is where Geert steps in.
Thank you, Roland. Roland is very modest. Good morning, by the way. I'm good? Yes. Roland is very modest because he makes it sound as if I had all the fun, but basically we had all the fun together. So we very soon came to the conclusion that what we wanted in between to sort of as a common ground was a domain-specific language, and for various reasons we decided to express that in XML, especially because then we could validate it before we send it into the transform. So we wanted the domain-specific language for business users to express what they wanted in the output without really caring about roughly not caring about what the output format would be, whether JSON, CSV, or one of the more complex like SDMX, or XBRL, sorry. But there's a variety in business users. A lot of the business users just want to see Excel, and then there are quite a bit of business users that are very keen on sort of having this more like a programming language. So there were quite a bit of tensions that you have to take into account. Either, how many features do we want to give? How much power do we give to the business user? And on the other hand, not scare away the business users that just want a plain and simple thing. And then whatever you convert, we didn't do any code generation, which means there's a lot of technical restrictions. A report expressed in what later became the Nederlandse Bank XML format. So our input is a very tabularized XML. Roughly, it's a root element with child elements, and all the row or all the fields are expressed as attributes. So that's always what we get in. And but that could be like 100K, but it also could be a few gigabytes. So there comes streaming, and we didn't want to do code generation. We wanted to sort of interpret the template that says, this is what we want, have the data in, and merge it, and have the output. And so what I will show next is just some business requirements. Did I say everything? Oh, A good one is we started off with CSV, but the thing is, a month or so down the road, maybe 2, we had CSV in production. So you make decisions about a domain-specific language business users would use, and then you put that in production, and then you say, okay, now we've got CSV, let's do something more complex. So yeah, after a month, you do a training to the business people saying like, oh, the training we had last month, let's forget that because we had to make some changes. Not very much, but so that was an interesting touch. What we're talking, interestingly, during the break yesterday, George suggested that it would be good to hear success stories. So George, I'm very happy. I consider this a success story. So, but there was some, there is no rocket science. This is what I wanted to say. So we consider this a success story. There's no, those who fancy like exciting XSLT or rocket science, I have to disappoint you. We got this thing working, and we got it really well. I think we got it working really well. And a lot of people have done this. So what I would like to emphasize is, doing this, we found some challenges, and each challenge in each project is different. So you cannot copy this, and I hope you sort of learn of the challenges we had and give that a thought. This slide is yeah, well, Lego bricks. I think you mentioned the first time you saw this. But I try to visualize the complexity of what we need, and doing a tabular XML, or what we consider a tabular XML into CSV is no science at all. We've all that a zillion times before. All have done that a zillion times before. But I'm just setting the scene. What we have on the left is a representation of the DMB XML format. It's box in box. So it's a box, it's a root, it's rows, it's fields, and we need to translate that in something similar, just like a collection of fields with some separation. But what I'm showing there is we need the possibility to drop a column, to indicate which column to drop. We need the possibility to add a header row, and we need the possibility to drop some rows. We also, and that's why there is this little crippled square, we need to give the users, the business users, the power to indicate this particular column here we want to do some operations on. So I'm not sure this is very clear. I put some colors in there, but this sort of sets the requirements. And the impact on the language, I'm not sure this is very readable. It doesn't really matter as such. It's easy. You just express in your template that you have rows and you have fields. And there are a certain set of attributes. I'm just saying, sometimes you want matching, like you say there is this attribute in the start format, and I want to match that on a particular output field in the CSV. And the name thing here is the header of the CSV. Sometimes you want to push this through a mapping table. There is codes in the databases of the Nederlandse Bank, and at the end there is codes that are expected from all of these instances that want your reports, and you sort of want to map them. The business knows that, so you want to have a value, send it to a mapping table, and replace it with the mapping value. No rocket science in there. Sometimes you just want a literal column, not very much in CSV, but in the other formats we would have that a lot. Sometimes you want to do processes, and I'm going to already give away something. There is this last field has a process which is the attribute process is hash read reduced car set and then hash read datetime. It basically means it's a token referencing a function, and it's a function called on the result found in this case, reprev date attribute in our source. There's two functions applied on one single value. So we had to use, or we were very happy to use higher order functions for getting there. and then it stops. No. Okay, a quick word on mapping. I already did that, so we have this mapping table per project. Business fills that in, or our business analysts fill that in. They say the mapping table, in this case, legal proceedings, I guess. An X is mapped into a 0, and a little bit below, everything 11001 is mapped to S11, so there's a sort of balancing act there. It gets more interesting, so we've now set the scene. It gets more interesting if we start talking about, when we start talking about SDMX, because that's a lot more complex, because now business users want, and I hope the image clarifies something, but the business users want to use some cells to put in a header. And then they want to do some grouping. So they want to flow through the table, and all the blue boxes need to get in a container for blue boxes, a group. The green as well, but before that we need the protocols explained. So we already need to know the groups in the beginning, and all of this is streaming. And they also want to express a number of hierarchical containers. So I just showed here, there's the blue group, inside there is a container, and then there is the data in a separate row-like container, but it could go deeper. So here's an example of what we did in the template header. There's a technical thing, we need to work on the namespaces. And again, we have a header with fields. The interesting thing there is that we had to come up with something, semantic naming, because we just don't want the field-to-field mapping. Sometimes we want to construct something like a sender object, which was then constructed from 3 fields. And that's why we have semantic naming. It's something known by the software as we don't just have to make this a field, name, but we have to make this a construct. And in the template body, is the code actually visible? Yeah, okay. We use screenshots for doing this, and I'm not sure how it comes, but okay. What you just see here is a group, so we wanted to have a grouping construct to indicate we need a container here. And some of the attributes from the source data actually go into as dimensions, it's called in SDMX. And then we need like grouping, a different level of containers. We might have different groupings in there as well. And that's about it. So we wanted to keep this as simple as possible. I might just say that we have group by for grouping, but we also have some sort of a case construct, which is then group when. But that's where we wanted to stop. Like, the business people know sort of the context. They know, like, we've got containers here. They know we've got observations and dimensions, and they might be grouped. That's what they understand. So most of them can deal with a group and a group by without thinking about get the namespaces right, get the names right of the output. So by complexity, it stops there. XBRL is a bit more of the same thing, except that we've got multipart grouping there, so grouping based on more attributes, and sometimes that's just one. It indicates per row you evaluate how many fields you have to use in your grouping construct. Not much to do on the templating side there, because all the logic is based on values in the output format. So that's a task for those who did the table format or the DNB XML. So I told you this. Here's where the fun was, developing this language and the constant pressure of making sure you get this right, because it needs to be powerful yet simple. And that's a constant pressure, because we want to put more functionality, but then you get more complexity. And at the end of the day, we had to do 5 XSLTs, and all this stuff needed to be streaming. I'm not going to do a streaming XSLT course. I just want to point out some things we discovered along the way that could be interesting for those that never got into streaming XSLT at all. basically, I think you have to understand we did not do code generation, which means that you're constantly swapping your context from the data that flows in and your template you have in your memory, and you're constantly swapping, yet still keeping this as streaming. So what we found earlier, one of the powerful things of streaming, in my opinion, is I think that you know when to stop streaming. The reason we chose for streaming is not because it's fancy, because, well, sometimes you have to send in a document a couple of gigabytes, and then you want to do this context swapping all the time. And well, the good thing is that you know when you understand that you have to stop streaming. Like, okay, here I can just put this in memory and work from there. So what I wanted to point out here is, well, we have a variable here where we have the complete dimension, so that's part of the template language in memory by using copy of. And the second example is where we did grouping on multiple attributes. Then it's very interesting to just do a copy of all the attributes and send it to a function, creating this sorted hash. So copy, whenever you think, I don't need streaming at this point, make your life easy and just copy the thing. But think about when you can stop streaming. And the other thing is that this is a lifesaver, is XSL fork. If you remember, you need to create a header at the start, a header at the bottom. Just split the stream, go fork. Fork is really, really good, and we didn't experience any performance problems. I think you're still streaming, but you're splitting, so that means, I guess that, I'm looking at Michael now, that means that you're just doing a lot of output buffering?
Yes, you're sending the input to multiple processes.
Yeah. Yeah, so thank you. So for those who didn't understand Michael's comment, you're sending it to multiple processes and you buffer until you sort of bring them together at the end. Thank you. And higher order functions. So yeah, no need to go into this code, but look into it. If you want to sort of have a token that later then executes as a function, there's quite a bit of functionality in the higher order functions for that. I'm losing this. Oh, it's you again.
Thank you. Well, the solution that's been put forward by Geert, and okay, we discussed it, so I guess some of it was mine, but not on the XSLT part. That created the possibility for us to centralize the whole exchange part. So the transformation is just a single service in a complete integration environment. And the good thing is that the business units are no longer in control. The business units are in control on semantics, but not on syntax anymore. And it's easy for them to develop two files that are dealing with their semantics. The naming from the database that we are storing to the naming of the institution that wants to receive a report from us, and the mapping on some of the codes that we are using and some of the codes that the institution is using. That's it. There's no transformation in data that is really being altered. Otherwise, we would lose track of what we are reporting. The knowledge on the syntaxes is completely on IT, and it is stored now only in just 5 XSLT style sheets. The rest, there's no software anymore that is made by ourselves that understands any of these syntaxes. It's not necessary anymore. We have a specialized query that creates the XML from the database, and that's about it. We've bought the normal software for schema validation, and for the XSLT, in this case, we use the Saxonica from Michael in the EE version. Like Geert said, we have hundreds of MBs for an instance, up to 1 or 2 gigs, which makes streaming inevitable if you want to have any kind of response times. All the other stuff that we need from this transformation service is dealt with other services. So also there are no zillion programs anymore in place, and we have just 5 XSLTs and 1 transformation service. The new reports that are being envisioned by European institutions, about 6 months every time there's a new idea on what we should be reporting, it takes now days to implement because everything is in a configuration now. They create a template, they create a mapping file, off to the races. There's no intervening of any software developer anymore, which is good. Obviously, you wanted to know what kind of observations we had on this project, and some of them are yours.
Okay, I think the first one is, it just came up a couple of weeks ago. There was this compound keys. So we want, in one of the earlier formats, we want to sort of group based on a couple of keys. And in the SDMX, we did not support that. And then the question is like, where do we fix this? We want to have this on the market in a couple of days. Do we start changing the domain-specific language? Will we then change the XSLT code? Or should we just say the people doing the output format, like, can you just take these 2-3 attributes and throw them together? So there's this constant, this is just an example. There's an obvious answer to this specific example, but it makes us think like, if you want something to change, where do you change it? That's an interesting observation. And then there's a constant pressure of getting the balance right. How much functionality, there's requests for functionality. We want to do our own Python function inside this field. Do we allow that? No, we don't. Do we ever want to? I think I'll leave the rest to you, yeah.
The training during the course was a little hampered because we were under time pressure. So once one format was being used, the first one being CSV, which is pretty easy, and obviously you can imagine that the database guy said, well, why do you need all the transformation? I can get CSV from our database and create a query. Why do you do it difficult that way? Wanted to have one solution, and CSV was just a starter. If you're going to explain this to the business, what they need to put in their templates and in their mappings, and you get to the more complex syntaxes like SDMX and XBRL, every time you need to reiterate with these business users, now you have more options because now you want to make this report in XBRL, so you have something extra to have in form. Where in the CSV you put just 50 in a column and everybody's happy, XBRL would never accept that, and you need to have the measure there or the dimensions there or whatever you have. The business needs to provide this information, so they had continuing with the training on every time we created a new layer of syntaxes. The main problem, which still exists, is the XSLT 3 support by our own IT department. It is such a small language for us that there's no business case to have someone in there to have a full-time contract and support XSLT when something goes AWOL. We try to have contracts with people like Geert to have some kind of emergency, because when in a production environment the style sheet would break, everything, just like a normal reporter does, is being done at 5 to 12. So 5 minutes before midnight, the report is made and being sent off before the obligation has to be met. And so when it breaks, the next morning it's panic, we need to fix it now. Most of the people are not available now if you want to have them external, or it will cost you a lot of money. So that is still a problem. We don't have the employment for somebody to have XSLT in their pockets, but that's the way it is. One small detail, when we report to ECB, AOPA, etc., we get feedback that is sometimes based on processors. So you get an export statement back that there's something wrong, that the XBRL formula 227 has gone wrong. If you put that before the business, nobody knows what to do. So we need something to translate that back to what they know. We haven't solved that one yet. In the end, business users are content. We have created something, I think, that has made a real separation of concerns. And we still have some future plans in our pockets. And the flexibility that we created for ourselves to provide to all 25 institutions that want to have reports from us, we want to bring that to the reporters too, so that they can choose their own syntax to tell us what they need to tell, because we are not interested in the syntax that they provide. We're interested in the semantics. And whether they do that by CSV or XBRL, in the end, we don't care. But that is still a future dream. Please, put your questions forward.
So thank you very much for presentation. So question from Mike A.
That one's for you.
You think so?
I was involved with a similar project once where we were doing custom reporting and devised a domain-specific language for doing it. And we started by having the XSLT interpret the domain-specific language, and we moved later to compiling it into XSLT. And I got the impression you're interpreting rather than generating XSLT. I wonder if you considered both.
So maybe it is for you. We didn't, well, generating an XSLT from the domain-specific language is something we considered, but we wanted to do that as a last resort. It felt like avoiding risk by just merging the stuff, and then it felt like more control. And maybe something Roland didn't say is it's all in a database. So we've got the XSLT in a database, and we also have the domain-specific language in a database. So you feed the transformer with a bunch of files, and merging them felt more secure. So I might be mistaken, but we basically didn't want to generate the XSLT. I do realize it could have made life a lot easier if we would have done that. But we sort of thought, like, let's do that as a last resort.
But it's also because we only have 5 languages which the XSLT supports a single language. So there was one XSLT who understands XBRL, one who understands JSON, one who understands SDMX. If we had XSLT that were more report-based, because the XSLT doesn't know what the report is all about. It only knows the syntax of that report. So if we would go another way and say we want XSLTs that are report-specific, maybe your way would be the correct way. But now we are limited to, we are supporting only 5 syntaxes, so 5 XSLT, and that's it.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any more questions. No, okay, so thank you very much.
There's sorry, I would like to point out that for various reasons we decided not to do a paper, which means that there's just a presentation. But please talk to us during the breaks. And for those following a live stream, don't hesitate to send a tweet or an email for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much again.